Elvis's Cadillac eased down a deserted side street of Memphis, the summer heat still clinging to the pavement like steam from the studio. He'd just left a marathon tape session, crave of silence and solitude. Stepping away from bright avenues, he guided the car past shuttered storefronts until they reached an old library, its doors locked, windows dark. At the empty bus stop under a sickly street lamp, an elderly woman stood alone, clutching a cardboard sign. "I only want bread." Her face was drawn and familiar. Elvis's breath caught as recognition struck. This was Miss Grayson, his gentle English teacher from Tupelo. She had once coaxed a terrified 9-year-old boy to read poetry aloud, giving him the courage to find his own voice. Now she stood here, alone and hungry. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, heart pounding. This chance reunion wasn't coincidence. It felt like fate calling him back to a debt he'd never known he owed. And as he watched her shoulders rise and fall in the stagnant air, Elvis knew one thing. He couldn't drive away. Not this time. The humid air clung to Elvis Presley like a second skin as his Cadillac rolled into the fading light of the neglected neighborhood. He guided the car onto the cracked pavement near the shuttered public library, its broad steps worn smooth by years of unwatched comings and goings. At the bus stop, under a flickering street lamp, stood a lone figure, an elderly woman, her back straight despite the weight of time, clutching a tattered cardboard sign reading, "I only want bread." Elvis killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching her in the rearview mirror. The reflection of her gaunt profile and threadbare coat stirred something deep in his memory. He remembered a bright-eyed teacher, voice firm and patient, guiding him through the fear of reading aloud. Could it be? He stepped out, coat collar turned up against the dusk. Rays of salmon fading sky lit his dark hair, and as he approached, she shrugged beneath the wind's whisper. Her head lowered. When she finally looked up, her eyes held both recognition and disbelief. "Miss Grayson," he ventured softly. Her mouth parted. No words came. She shifted the cardboard sign, fumbling with its edges, as if uncertain whether to believe. Behind her spectacles, her eyes glimmered like frightened birds. I taught you English in Tupelo," he reminded her gently. "You made me stand, read poetry when I was afraid. You gave me my voice." Her hand flew to her chest. For a moment, the frail wrinkles on her face smoothed with the echo of that long-ago praise. Then the weight of her circumstances returned, sinking her shoulders. Elvis gestured to the bench beside a closed-down cafe. "May I sit?" She nodded, and he guided her to the wooden seat, its paint peeling under years of neglect. The gleaming Cadillac stood just beyond, its polished fenders at stark odds with her patched gloves and faded coat. He settled beside her, heart pounding with the gravity of this chance. "Tell me," he began, voice low, "what happened?" Trembling fingers reached into her pocket. She produced a frayed photograph, a young man in uniform, his smile bright amid the dark studio backdrop. He looked every inch the soldier. "This is my son," she said. Her voice cracked like dry ice. "He went to Vietnam and never came home. I waited for a letter that never arrived. I lost our savings, paying telegram fees. They took my apartment to settle debts. My pension, gone. I have nothing left but this sign." Elvis drew in a breath, ashamed by the gulf between their lives. He gripped the photograph gently. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words felt feeble. "I know what it is to lose someone, to feel voiceless." He let the memory rise. A shy boy in a classroom trembling over a poem, Miss Grayson's steady gaze guiding him through each line until his voice found strength. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, Her pride was woven into every fiber. She would not crumble in front of a stranger. "I don't want pity," she whispered. I just wanted bread." Elvis lifted a crisp bill from his coat pocket, $100, unmarked by paparazzi. He placed it into her gloved hand. "For tonight," he said softly. "Let me bring you bread tomorrow." She stared at the money, blinking as if seeing color after years of black and white. "Thank you," she managed, voice steadier now. He offered a reassuring smile. "I'll come back," he promised, "and I'll bring more than bread." She looked up, doubt flickering in her eyes. Who are you?" Elvis hesitated, the truth passing through his mind like a knife. Then he smiled, a private glint in his gaze. "Someone who owes you a great debt," he said. She watched him slip away into the gathering night, the Cadillac's tail lights fading into the mist. The money burned in her palm, but it was the promise of return that warmed her heart. Behind her, the library's windows stood dark and empty, a silent witness to this unexpected reunion. Under the street lamp, where her name had once been etched into his earliest memories, the woman gripped the photograph and the money, her breathing steadying. Tomorrow, she would have bread, but tonight, she held something more. The knowledge that the boy she once believed in had not forgotten her voice, or her sacrifices. And somewhere down those dark streets, the man who once trembled over a poem now carried the power to repay a kindness that had shaped his destiny. The morning after his chance encounter with Miss Grayson, Elvis Presley lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memory of her haunted eyes and the photograph of her missing son replaying like an unrelenting melody. The distant hum of Graceland's air conditioning seemed insufficient to cool the fire rising in his chest. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, bare feet sinking into the plush rug. He dressed in jeans and a white t-shirt, casual armor for an urgent mission. Downstairs in the breakfast room, Priscilla sat by the French doors, reading the morning paper. Elvis entered silently, eyes dark with determination. She looked up, concern instantly knitting her brows. "Elvis, you look different," she said softly. He handed her a folded bill and the photograph he had taken from Miss Grayson's hand. "I found her last night," he said, voice raw with anger and sorrow. "My old teacher, the woman who first made me believe I could speak. She's out there begging for bread." "Priscilla, how could this happen?" Priscilla rose, smoothing her skirt. She peered at the photograph. The young soldier's confident grin had faded into Elvis's pocket. "We have to help her," she whispered. Elvis paced, fists clenched at his sides. That sign she held. "I only want bread." She's been silent, proud. She wouldn't ask for anything more. He paused at the window, gaze fixed on the gardens beyond. "I swore I'd be back today with more than money. I'm going to find her son." Priscilla reached for his hand. "You can't just waltz into a veterans' hospital looking for a man with no file." He shook her hand off gently. "Watch me." Within the hour, Elvis summoned Colonel Tom Parker's chief investigator, a retired detective known for discretion. The man arrived at Graceland's porte cochere in a black sedan, his hat tipped low. Inside, Elvis spread out the photograph and Miss Grayson's address. "Her apartment burned down after her son left for Vietnam," Elvis explained, fingers tracing the boy's uniform. "She lost her home, her pension. I need to know where he is, alive or dead." The detective studied the photograph. "I've got a contact at the Veterans Hospital in Augusta, Georgia. They treat repatriated soldiers with severe injuries. There's a Grayson on the charts, registered under Walter Grayson. Serial number." He read a number. "I can confirm." Elvis nodded, white-knuckled. "Arrange transport. I'm going." Within 24 hours, Elvis flew on Parker's private jet to Augusta. Priscilla arranged for Miss Grayson to be checked into the Ritz-Carlton across the street, registered under the name Mrs. G. Winslow, so staff would cater to her needs without prying. 2 aides escorted her in a town car, unlocked by keys Elvis had pressed into her palm. She closed the door behind her, the proof of her dignity intact. Elvis, descending the hospital's marmoreal steps, felt the weight of every uniformed veteran he passed. Inside, the corridors smelled of antiseptic and regret. He presented the photograph to a nurse behind the admissions desk. The nurse's eyes widened. "Mr. Presley?" she said, before composing herself. "You're here about Mr. Grayson?" Elvis nodded. "I need to see him." She led him down a hallway, lined with wheelchairs and stretchers. At the end, a heavy oak door swung open to reveal a large room divided by thin screens. Patients lay in beds, some staring at blank walls, others drifting in and out of consciousness. Elvis felt his throat close when he saw the boy. No, the man he had admired in youth. Now he was gaunt and pallid, his legs encased in braces, scars tracing silver paths across his arms. His eyes, when they opened, flickered with confusion and fear. "Elvis," the man whispered, voice ragged as a broken record. Recognition flickered, then vanished. He closed his eyes again, pain lacing every breath. Elvis knelt at his bedside, swallowing memories of the classroom in Tupelo, the triumphant tremor in a young boy's voice as Miss Grayson prodded him to read. "Walter," he asked gently. "It's me, Elvis, Lisa Marie's dad." Walter Grayson's eyes flicked open, searching Elvis's face. "Miss Grayson, she said you'd come." His voice cracked. "She said you'd pay her rent." Elvis felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them back. "I'm here for both of you," he said. "I'm getting you home, and I'm keeping your mother safe. You're not alone." He pressed her mother's address into Walter's hand. "You'll be staying with her. She needs you." Walter closed his eyes, the exhaustion of years in that motion. When he opened them again, they were steadier. "Thank you," he rasped. Elvis rose, pain in his chest lancing. He glanced at the nurse, whose face was soft with compassion. "Arrange a ground ambulance," he said. "No questions. Discharge him today." The nurse nodded, and Elvis turned to leave. Past the other beds, veterans glanced up as he moved, a famous face without costume, easing their comrade toward a chance at reclaiming home. Back at the Ritz-Carlton, Elvis found Miss Grayson sitting by the window of her suite, hands folded in her lap. Walter's arrival in the hospital gown would be the surprise of her life. Elvis knocked softly. She turned, startled. He gestured her to follow. In the sitting area, he had placed a wheelchair next to the window. "Mom," he said, voice catching, "your son is healthy enough to come home. He's waiting downstairs now." She stood in a whisper of silk, tears already glinting in her eyes. "Where? How?" she managed. Elvis didn't answer with words. He only offered his hand. She placed her fingers in his, warmth flooding her limbs. Behind him, the door to her suite opened, and Walter appeared, pale and unsteady. He closed the distance in 2 shuffling steps and wrapped his arms around her frail frame. She sobbed into his hospital gown, decades of fear and sorrow pouring out in trembling waves. Elvis watched them reunite, heart both breaking and soaring. He turned away, exiting to the corridor. He paused at the door, hand on the doorknob. No cameras, no audience, just a silent witness to a family rescued from oblivion. In that moment, he understood precisely what Miss Grayson had given him all those years ago. A voice, a chance to stand when he had none. and tonight he had given it back to her. Weeks passed as the Harmonies for Hope Academy took shape, but Elvis's thoughts remained with Miss Grayson and her son. He arranged for a modest gathering in the very library where, years ago, she had coaxed him through trembling lines of Shakespeare and stirred in him a passion for words. The brick building, its columns pocked by time, had reopened on weekend evenings for community events. That night, it would host a small recital, intimate, unannounced to the wider press. The library's reading room was transformed with rows of folding chairs, their metal frames gleaming under soft sconces. A single microphone stood before a grand reading desk, and modest instruments, an upright piano, 2 acoustic guitars, a violin, waited against the far wall. Mrs. Grayson arrived just before sunset, her elegant posture trying to mask the gentle trembling in her hands. Tonight, she wore a simple navy dress and new leather shoes that fit her small feet like gloves. Walter, clad in a pressed shirt and slacks, guided her forward, his wheelchair parked discreetly to the side. Elvis slipped in among the last late-arriving guests, dressed casually in dark denim and a crisp white shirt. He wished to observe unseen, to gauge her reaction without the trappings of celebrity. As he took a seat near the back, his gaze swept the room. Former students, neighbors, a handful of hospital staff, and children from the academy who would perform. The atmosphere was one of hushed anticipation, as though the building itself held its breath at the promise of rediscovered voices. The program began with a quartet of youngsters from Harmonies for Hope, their uncertain but hopeful melodies weaving through the vaulted ceiling. A student violinist faltered once, but the pianist caught her cue, and the duo soared past the misstep, drawing surprised applause. Next, a small jazz ensemble formed by teenage pupils shifted the mood with a bluesy summertime, the horn player's notes bending in smoky arcs that hinted at distant sorrows. Then, a hush fell as the librarian stepped forward with a handwritten introduction. She spoke of a teacher whose gentle insistence had changed the life of a shy boy, setting him on a path to worldwide stages, and now that boy had invited his mentor here to honor her legacy. At the far end of the room, she stiffened, recognition exploding in her eyes. With a nod from the librarian, Elvis rose from his seat. He crossed the narrow aisle and signaled a guitar player to join him by the microphone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Is that?" "My God, it is." But no one applauded. All eyes turned to him, and then to the woman who had first heard his voice. He spoke into the mic. "Miss Grayson, you once taught me that words carry power, and music carries the heart. I'd like to sing something for you." He lifted his guitar, fingers finding familiar frets, and strummed the opening of "Softly as I Leave You." His voice began low, almost a confession. "I walk softly as I leave you. I'll whisper a memory. Let love be your shelter. Keep my song company." His words floated across the room, weaving between the dusty shelves and the polished wooden tables. Miss Grayson's breath caught, her hand rising to her lips. Walter pressed forward in his wheelchair, leaning on the arms as though to stand. Somewhere in the second verse, recognition blossomed in her eyes. She rose, unsteady but determined, and crossed to the front. The crowd parted for her like a gentle tide. Elvis paused mid-verse, gaze locked on hers. "You gave me my voice, ma'am," he said softly. "Tonight, I want you to remember yours." Then his hands shifted, delivering the final chorus. "When silence surrounds you, let memory be your friend, and hold on to the music that never really ends." As the last note hovered, the library exhaled. No thunderous ovation, only the soft rustle of gratitude. Miss Grayson stepped to the microphone, her voice steady but husky. "Thank you, Elvis. You've reminded me that even when our songs falter, our hearts can still sing." She turned and embraced him, fingers gripping his shoulders. The congregation stood, children, parents, neighbors, bowing their heads in a silent tribute. A single tear escaped her eye, mapping a trail down her cheek. Walter rolled forward, joining the embrace, and Elvis cradled him gently. The three linked arms as the audience closed in, forming a circle of reclaimed dignity. Up in the balcony, a librarian carefully wiped her glasses, blinking away tears. Laughter flickered in the corner, soft, relieved, like the gentle rise of a spring breeze after a long winter. In that sanctuary of books and echoes, the past and present melded. A teacher's courage, a pupil's promise, and a son's rediscovered compassion. No marquee lights, no media frenzy. Simply a room of souls stirred by a melody of redemption. And as they departed into the Memphis night, the library's doors closing behind them, the echo of that song lingered. Proof that memory, once reclaimed, can resonate forever. The morning sun shone pale and tender over the modest brick bungalow on Ridgeway Street, where Miss Grayson had finally settled into a life of renewed promise. The garden, planted by Elvis's landscaper at her request, was already abloom with marigolds and zinnias. The once battered wheelchair ramp sloped gently to the front door, a single step replaced by smooth concrete. In the neat driveway, a new sedan waited, Walter's own car, parked proudly under the oak. Inside, Miss Grayson moved quietly from room to room, taking measure of the space. High ceilings, with fresh plaster, oak floors gleaming under new varnish, bookshelves stocked with literature donated by friends of Graceland. A gleaming piano occupied one corner, its lid propped open to display ivory keys ready for song. She ran her hand along the polished surface, breath catching in her throat. Morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains as Walter appeared in the doorway, dressed in a crisp shirt and bow tie. He offered a broad grin. "Mom, it's beautiful." His voice, though husky from the lump in his throat, carried genuine wonder. She smiled back, the weight of months lifting. "It's more than I ever dared hope." A gentle knock at the door heralded the final piece of the puzzle. Elvis Presley stood there unannounced, dressed inconspicuously in a charcoal sport coat and slacks. His dark hair was carefully groomed, and a small envelope was tucked into his breast pocket. Miss Grayson's eyes widened. This time, recognition was immediate. "Elvis," she whispered, voice trembling yet radiant with gratitude. He stepped inside, setting the envelope on the piano before smoothing his hand over its lid. "I thought you'd like a few more surprises," he said quietly. Walter rolled forward to greet him, offering his hand. Elvis knelt to meet him at eye level, placing a firm palm on the young man's shoulder. "You've done more than I ever could to honor your mother," Elvis said. "I just wanted you to know how far you've come." Miss Grayson crossed the room, her hands clasped at her throat. Elvis watched her with gentle respect, waiting until she spoke first. She turned toward him, tears glistening. "You have given us everything, but I still have one more question." Her voice steadied. "Are you satisfied?" Elvis paused, measuring his words. He walked to the front window, hands resting on the sill as he surveyed the home and garden. Then he faced her directly and smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of memory. "More than satisfied," he replied. "I'm honored." He retrieved the envelope and unfolded its contents, an old composition book, bound in faded leather with frayed edges. Inside were pages of Elvis's earliest poems and lyric drafts, scribbled in pencil, some lines crossed out, others marked with the exuberance of youth. She recognized her own handwriting on one page, margin notes from her English class. "Speak slowly. Find your courage." Miss Grayson's breath caught as she traced the words. "You kept this all these years?" Elvis nodded. "You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. This is for you, proof that your lessons lived inside me." The house was silent except for the soft rustling of pages as she turned them. Walter leaned in, peering over her shoulder. He touched the faded script gently. The room felt hallowed, charged by the weight of decades. Finally, Miss Grayson closed the book and held it against her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching in tremulous waves. Elvis stepped forward and gathered her hands in his. He spoke quietly. "I came to repay a debt that can never be measured. You gave me a voice. I hope this gift carries mine to you." They stood together by the piano, the morning light wrapping them in a golden hush. In the living room, the bouquet of marigolds glowed like embers of renewed hope. Walter rolled forward, beaming, and rested his hand on his mother's back. Elvis slipped away to the entryway, pausing at the door. He looked back once, as though committing the scene to memory. Miss Grayson, teacher, mentor, friend, her eyes shining with tears and the promise of new chapters. He pulled a crisp photograph from his jacket pocket and pressed it into Walter's hand. An image of Miss Grayson and Elvis on the day of their reunion, standing beneath the library's columns. "For your mother's new life," Elvis said to Walter, "let her see the world she helped create." Walter nodded, sliding the photograph into his shirt pocket. Elvis gave a final nod to mother and son, then stepped outside. The door closed softly behind him. No cameras waited in the street. No headlines would blare of this modest act of grace. Elvis slipped into his black Cadillac and eased away. The engines hum a gentle farewell. The house on Ridgeway Street remained locked in stillness, its rooms echoing with unspoken gratitude and the rustle of the leather-bound notebook. Proof that a teacher's voice, once given, can resonate a lifetime. Days later, Miss Grayson and Walter would sit at the piano together, her voice guiding his hesitant fingers through the simplest scales. In the hush, beneath the morning sun, they would hear not only music, but the echo of a gift that spanned decades. The unbreakable bond of teacher and student, repaid at last by the boy who became a king.